The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as I adjusted my second-hand tie one more time. Sarah gripped my arm so tightly her manicured nails dug through my jacket sleeve. The Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom buzzed with the kind of wealth that spoke in hushed tones and designer labels. As we stepped through the gilded entrance, Sarah leaned close to my ear, her breath sharp with champagne she'd consumed during the car ride. "Try not to embarrass me. These people are way above your level." The words hit like ice water down my spine. I watched her shoulders straighten as she transformed into someone I barely recognized, her smile becoming calculating and predatory. Around us, men in $1,000 suits discussed mergers, while women draped in jewelry worth more than my annual salary laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I stood there absorbing Sarah's words while she immediately began her performance. Within minutes, she had positioned herself near a group of venture capitalists discussing portfolio diversification strategies. When Gerald Patterson, a silver-haired real estate mogul worth hundreds of millions, extended his hand toward me, Sarah stepped between us with practiced precision. "Gerald, this is Evan," she said with a dismissive wave. "He's just a colleague from work. Nothing too exciting." The sting of her words cut deeper than I expected. We had been together for 2 years. 2 years of shared dinners, weekend trips to Santa Barbara, and countless nights where she'd fallen asleep in my arms. Yet here she was, reducing me to background noise in her orchestrated social climbing expedition. I watched her work the room like a seasoned politician. She laughed at Gerald's stories about flipping commercial properties in downtown Los Angeles, nodding enthusiastically when he mentioned his latest acquisition near the Arts District. Her knowledge of real estate was superficial at best, but she peppered her responses with buzzwords she'd obviously Googled beforehand. I completely understand the challenges of urban development. She cooed, though I knew for a fact she'd never read a zoning ordinance in her life. My marketing firm specializes in luxury property campaigns. The conversation reminded me of how we'd met. Sarah had been struggling to launch her marketing business, working 16-hour days from a cramped studio apartment in Culver City. She'd maxed out her credit cards buying office equipment and had been 3 months behind on rent when I'd offered to help. I'd used my entire savings account, nearly $8,000, to keep her business afloat during those critical early months. Back then, she'd cried in my arms about feeling like a failure. She'd whispered that I was the only person who believed in her dreams. Now, watching her dismiss our relationship to impress strangers, I wondered if those vulnerable moments had been genuine or simply another performance. The tech executives nearby discussed artificial intelligence applications in financial services. Sarah gravitated toward them like a moth to flame, abandoning Gerald mid-sentence when she spotted bigger opportunities. I followed at a respectful distance, feeling increasingly invisible. "My company handles digital marketing for several Fortune 500 clients," she announced to a group discussing blockchain technology. This was news to me. Her client list consisted primarily of local restaurants and a few boutique shops in West Hollywood. Her biggest account was a chain of yoga studios that paid her $1,500 monthly for social media management. A prominent venture capitalist named Douglas Chen raised an eyebrow. Which Fortune 500 companies? I'd be curious to know how they're approaching cryptocurrency integration in their marketing strategies. Sarah's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered with practiced ease. "I'm bound by confidentiality agreements, of course, but I can say they're very forward-thinking about emerging technologies." I knew she was drowning, but I also knew she'd never forgive me for rescuing her from a lie she'd constructed. Instead, I retreated to the bar, ordering a club soda while processing the growing realization that my girlfriend was fundamentally ashamed of everything I represented. The bartender, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, noticed my expression. "Rough night." "Something like that," I replied, watching Sarah promise Gerald Patterson that she'd call him personally about handling marketing for his next development project. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was networking for business opportunities while actively hiding the person who'd made her business possible in the first place. As the evening progressed, Sarah's performance became increasingly elaborate. She name-dropped celebrities she'd never met, referenced exclusive events she'd never attended, and spoke with authority about markets she'd never studied. Each fabrication felt like another brick in the wall she was building between us. I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about our relationship. Had she always seen me as a stepping stone? A safe harbor until something better came along. The community college where I taught renewable energy courses suddenly felt like a badge of shame rather than meaningful work I loved. 20 minutes into Sarah's networking marathon, I discovered the true scope of her deception. While she continued charming potential clients near the silent auction tables, I overheard her describing her marketing firm to a group of tech entrepreneurs. "We just signed a major contract with a streaming service," she declared confidently. "7 figures annually for their global campaign strategy." The claim was so outrageous I nearly choked on my drink. Last week, she'd borrowed $50 from me for groceries. Her office consisted of a shared workspace in Koreatown where she rented a desk by the month. The streaming service contract existed only in her imagination, crafted specifically to impress people whose validation she desperately craved. A sophisticated woman in an emerald evening gown approached me while Sarah continued fabricating her success story. The woman's silver hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and her jewelry spoke of old money rather than flashy nouveau riche displays. "Excuse me," she said with a warm smile. "Aren't you Evan Morrison from the Renewable Energy Program at Los Angeles Community College?" I blinked in surprise. "Yes, that's me. I'm sorry, have we met?" "Catherine Williams." She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "I read your research paper on crystalline silicon photovoltaic efficiency improvements. Fascinating work on reducing electron recombination losses. My research." She was talking about my research. For the past 3 years, I'd been developing algorithms to optimize solar panel efficiency, working evenings and weekends in the college's modest laboratory. The paper she mentioned had been published in a peer-reviewed engineering journal, but I'd assumed only a handful of academics would ever read it. "I was particularly impressed by your approach to surface passivation," Catherine continued. "The potential applications for utility-scale installations could be revolutionary." I felt a surge of pride mixed with bewilderment. Sarah had never once asked about my research. When I'd tried to explain my work over dinner, her eyes would glaze over as she checked her phone or steered the conversation toward her own business challenges. She'd referred to my laboratory time as tinkering with gadgets or playing scientist. "Thank you," I managed. "It's rare to meet someone outside academia who understands the technical aspects." "Oh, I'm not exactly outside academia," Catherine laughed. "I serve on the board of directors for the California Institute of Technology's Renewable Energy Initiative. We've been following your work with great interest." Before I could respond, Sarah materialized beside us with the force of a small hurricane. Her smile was bright and predatory as she assessed Catherine's expensive jewelry and confident demeanor. "Catherine, what a pleasure," Sarah interrupted, extending her hand as if they were old friends. "I'm Sarah Evans' girlfriend. He was just telling me about your conversation." I hadn't told her anything, but Sarah had clearly overheard enough to recognize an opportunity. Catherine's expression shifted slightly, becoming more polite, but noticeably cooler. "Evan was describing his photovoltaic research," Catherine said carefully. "Quite impressive work." "Oh, yes." Sarah laughed, her voice taking on that artificially bright tone I'd learned to dread. "Evan's always been passionate about his little science projects. I keep telling him he should think bigger, maybe transition into something more practical." The dismissive words hit me like a physical blow. "My little science projects." Catherine's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly, and I saw something shift in her expression. The respect she'd shown moments earlier was being undermined by Sarah's casual belittling of work that had taken years to develop. "I see," Catherine said slowly. "Well, the California Institute of Technology considers photovoltaic efficiency research to be quite practical given the global transition to renewable energy." Sarah's laugh became more forced. Of course, of course. I just meant that Evan could probably make more money in the private sector. You know how it is with teaching salaries. I wanted to disappear. Sarah was reducing my life's work to a paycheck while speaking to someone who clearly understood its actual significance. Catherine's polite smile couldn't mask her obvious disapproval of Sarah's attitude. "If you'll excuse me," Catherine said graciously, "I promised to speak with the event organizer about tomorrow's panel discussion on clean energy investments." She turned to me with genuine warmth. "Evan, I hope we can continue our conversation later. Your research deserves a much broader audience." As Catherine walked away, Sarah grabbed my arm with unnecessary force. "What were you doing?" she hissed. "You can't just start talking about your work like you're some kind of expert. These people will see right through that." The irony was staggering. Sarah, who had spent the entire evening fabricating credentials and accomplishments, was accusing me of pretending to be something I wasn't. The difference was that my expertise was real, documented, and apparently recognized by people far more qualified than anyone Sarah had been impressing with her fictional streaming service contracts. I looked around the ballroom with new eyes. I'd been assuming I didn't belong here, that Sarah's assessment of my worth was accurate. But Catherine Williams, a board member at one of the most prestigious technical institutes in the country, had sought me out specifically to discuss my work. She'd called it fascinating, revolutionary, practical. Maybe the problem wasn't that I didn't belong here. Maybe the problem was that Sarah couldn't see who I actually was. The evening took another unexpected turn when Marcus Chen appeared at my elbow like a genie summoned from the technological ether. Marcus was a legend in clean energy circles, the founder and CEO of Solar Tech Dynamics, a company that had revolutionized commercial solar installations across the western United States. His net worth was estimated somewhere north of $200 million, and his opinion could make or break emerging technologies in the renewable energy sector. "Evan Morrison," he said with genuine enthusiasm, extending his hand with the same respect he might show a peer. "I've been hoping to meet you all evening." Sarah, who had been sulking since Catherine's departure, perked up immediately. Her predatory smile returned as she positioned herself between Marcus and me, clearly assuming this was another opportunity for her to work her networking magic. Marcus barely acknowledged her presence. His focus remained entirely on me as he continued speaking with obvious excitement. "Your paper on electron transport optimization has been circulating through my research and development team for weeks. The potential efficiency gains you've outlined could increase solar panel output by up to 12%. I felt a rush of validation that was almost overwhelming. 12% efficiency improvements might sound modest to lay people, but in the solar industry, such gains represented millions of dollars in increased energy production and reduced installation costs. "Thank you," I said, struggling to maintain composure. The real-world applications were exactly what I hoped to achieve. Real-world applications. Marcus laughed. "Evan, you've solved one of the most persistent challenges in photovoltaic engineering. My team ran preliminary models based on your algorithms, and the results exceeded our most optimistic projections." Sarah's expression began shifting from opportunistic excitement to genuine confusion. She'd clearly expected another networking opportunity where she could insert herself into a conversation about topics she could fake her way through. Instead, she was witnessing a discussion about technical achievements she'd never bothered to understand or appreciate. "What Marcus is referring to," I explained to Sarah, though I could see her interest was purely performative, "is a method for reducing energy loss in solar cells through improved surface texturing and anti-reflective coatings." "Oh," Sarah said with forced brightness, "that sounds very technical." Marcus turned to her with polite curiosity. "Are you involved in renewable energy as well?" "I'm in marketing," Sarah replied, her confidence returning slightly. "I handle brand strategy for several major corporations." "Interesting." Marcus nodded. "The clean energy sector certainly needs better public communication strategies. Consumer adoption rates are still limited by misconceptions about cost and reliability." I watched Sarah's face light up as she recognized an opening. Exactly. That's precisely the kind of challenge my firm specializes in. We've developed comprehensive campaigns for Fortune 500 clients that have dramatically increased market penetration. Here we go again, I thought. The same fabricated credentials she'd been peddling all evening. But Marcus wasn't Gerald Patterson or the easily impressed tech enthusiast Sarah had been charming earlier. Marcus dealt with real numbers, actual contracts, and measurable results on a daily basis. Which Fortune 500 companies? Marcus asked with genuine professional interest. I'd be curious to know how they're positioning themselves in the sustainable energy marketplace. Sarah's pause lasted just a fraction too long. I'm bound by confidentiality agreements naturally, but I can say they're very committed to environmental responsibility. Marcus nodded politely, but I could see the slight shift in his expression. He'd recognized the evasion for what it was. In Silicon Valley and the broader tech industry, Marcus had probably encountered hundreds of people trying to inflate their credentials. He'd developed a sixth sense for distinguishing substance from performance. Turning back to me, Marcus's enthusiasm returned immediately. Have you considered filing patents for your photovoltaic improvements? The commercial applications could be worth significant licensing revenue. Patents. The word hung in the air like a revelation. I'd been so focused on the scientific aspects of my research that I hadn't seriously considered the commercial implications. Community college professors weren't typically encouraged to think about intellectual property or licensing deals. I hadn't really explored that possibility, I admitted. You should, Marcus said firmly. I'd be happy to introduce you to my patent attorney. Technology like yours could generate substantial passive income through licensing agreements with manufacturers. Sarah's head snapped toward me with sudden laser focus. Passive income. Licensing agreements. These were terms that penetrated her consciousness like nothing else could. I could practically see the calculations running behind her eyes as she reassessed everything she thought she knew about my work. How substantial? Sarah asked, attempting to sound casually interested while clearly hanging on every word. Marcus considered the question seriously. For efficiency improvements of this magnitude, conservative estimates would suggest mid-6 to low-7 figures annually in licensing revenue, depending on adoption rates among manufacturers. 6 to 7 figures annually. I felt dizzy. Sarah's face went through a series of micro-expressions that would have been comical if they weren't so revealing. Shock, recalculation, regret, and finally a calculating hunger that made my stomach turn. That's wonderful news, Sarah said suddenly, sliding closer to me and taking my arm with possessive familiarity. I've always known Evan was brilliant. I've been encouraging him to think bigger about monetizing his research. The lie was so blatant, so completely contrary to every conversation we'd ever had about my work, that I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about social insecurity or different backgrounds anymore. This was about Sarah's complete inability to value anything that didn't serve her immediate social or financial ambitions. Marcus's expression suggested he'd caught the sudden change in Sarah's demeanor as well. In the business world, he'd probably witnessed countless relationships where one person's success suddenly transformed their partner's level of interest and support. Well, Marcus said diplomatically, Evan's work speaks for itself. The scientific community has definitely taken notice. He handed me an elegant business card with embossed lettering. Call me next week. I'd like to discuss some potential collaboration opportunities. As Marcus moved on to greet other attendees, Sarah's grip on my arm tightened. Her earlier dismissiveness had evaporated completely, replaced by a feverish intensity that felt both foreign and deeply unsettling. Why didn't you tell me your research was worth that much money? She whispered urgently. Because you never asked, I thought. Because every time I tried to share my excitement about a breakthrough, you changed the subject. Because you've spent 2 years treating my work like an embarrassing hobby that prevented me from pursuing something more socially acceptable. Instead, I just looked at her, seeing clearly for the first time the person I'd been sharing my life with for 2 years. Someone who couldn't recognize value unless it came with a price tag attached. The evening's most shocking moment arrived when Robert Harrison himself began moving through the crowd toward our location. Robert Harrison wasn't just wealthy. He was legendary. The founder of Harrison Industries, a conglomerate spanning renewable energy, aerospace, and biotechnology, with an estimated net worth approaching $3 billion. His presence at charity events was always noteworthy, but his personal attention was something reserved for heads of state, Nobel laureates, and fellow titans of industry. I'd read about Harrison extensively during my renewable energy research. His company had pioneered several breakthrough technologies in wind and solar power generation, and their research division employed some of the most brilliant minds in sustainable energy development. The idea that he might know my name seemed as likely as being struck by lightning while winning the lottery. Harrison dismissed his security detail with a subtle gesture as he approached our position near the silent auction tables. He was shorter than I'd expected, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, but his presence commanded the immediate attention of everyone within a 20-foot radius. Conversations quieted as people recognized the significance of his movement through the crowd. "Evan Morrison," he said with a warm smile, extending his hand as if we were old friends. "Finally. We've been waiting to meet you." Sarah's face went pale instantly. The color drained from her cheek so completely that for a moment I worried she might faint. Her grip on my arm loosened as she struggled to process what was happening. "Mr. Harrison." I managed, shaking his hand while trying to understand how one of the most powerful men in American business knew who I was. "This is an honor." "The honor is mine," Harrison replied, his tone suggesting he wasn't simply being polite. "Your research on photovoltaic efficiency improvements has been circulating through my research and development division for months. My team leader called your work the most significant advancement in crystalline silicon technology she's seen in a decade." I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Harrison Industries employed hundreds of PhD researchers with access to unlimited funding and state-of-the-art equipment. The idea that my modest community college laboratory work had captured their attention seemed impossible. "I had no idea anyone outside academic circles had seen the paper," I said honestly. "Academic circles," Harrison laughed. "Evan, your algorithms have been the subject of intense discussion at every major renewable energy conference this year. The Department of Energy referenced your work in their latest efficiency standards proposal." Sarah stood frozen beside me, her mouth slightly open as she watched her evening's assumptions crumble in real time. The man she'd warned not to embarrass her was receiving personal attention from someone whose annual charitable contributions exceeded the gross domestic product of small nations. "Your research has implications far beyond theoretical improvements," Harrison continued. "We've run extensive modeling based on your published algorithms. Implementation across our solar installation network could increase energy output by millions of kilowatt-hours annually while reducing production costs." Other attendees began gravitating toward our conversation, drawn by the magnetic pull of Harrison's attention. I recognized several faces from the evening's networking sessions. Gerald Patterson pushed through the crowd with obvious desperation. His earlier dismissive attitude replaced by barely contained eagerness to insert himself into any interaction involving Harrison. "Mr. Harrison," Gerald interrupted breathlessly, "I don't believe we've had the pleasure. Gerald Patterson, Patterson Development Group." Harrison's response was politely devastating. "Mr. Patterson, I'm currently having an important conversation with Dr. Morrison. Perhaps we can connect another time." Dr. Morrison. Harrison had called me Dr. Morrison despite my lack of a doctorate degree. The title seemed to reflect his assessment of my work's significance rather than my formal credentials. Catherine Williams materialized at the edge of our circle, her earlier warmth toward me now making perfect sense. If she served on boards at prestigious institutions and Harrison Industries was tracking my research, her interest hadn't been casual academic curiosity. "Robert," Catherine said familiarly, confirming their professional relationship. "I see you finally connected with our solar efficiency expert." "Indeed," Harrison smiled. "I was just explaining to Evan how his work has been revolutionizing our thinking about next-generation photovoltaic installations." Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I don't understand. Evan teaches at a community college." Harrison turned toward her with mild curiosity, as if noticing her presence for the first time. "Teaching is often where the most innovative minds flourish. Some of history's greatest breakthroughs have come from educators who weren't constrained by corporate research parameters." The statement was clearly meant to be supportive, but it inadvertently highlighted Sarah's fundamental misunderstanding of how innovation and achievement actually worked. She'd spent the evening impressed by wealth and status while completely missing the substance that created both. "Mr. Harrison," I said, still struggling to process the surreal nature of the conversation, "I appreciate your interest, but I'm curious how my research came to your attention initially." "Dr. Amanda Foster. My head of renewable energy research brought your paper to my attention 6 months ago," Harrison explained. "She called it a paradigm shift in photovoltaic engineering. Amanda doesn't use that phrase lightly." Amanda Foster. The name was familiar from renewable energy journals, though I'd never met her personally. She was considered one of the leading experts in solar technology development, with a PhD from Stanford and numerous breakthrough patents to her credit. "We've actually been hoping to arrange a meeting," Harrison continued. "Amanda wanted to discuss potential collaboration opportunities and research funding. Your work deserves resources that match its significance. Research funding. Collaboration opportunities." The phrases felt like winning lottery numbers being called out in sequence. I'd been conducting my research with equipment borrowed from the community college and materials purchased with my own modest salary. The possibility of proper funding seemed like a fantasy. Sarah's voice had become increasingly strained as she struggled to reconcile the evening's revelations with her preconceived notions about my value and potential. "Evan never mentioned any of this," she said weakly. "Perhaps," Harrison suggested diplomatically, "Evan is naturally modest about his achievements. True innovators often focus on the work itself rather than recognition or compensation." The observation felt like a gentle rebuke of Sarah's obvious focus on social status and financial gain. Harrison had clearly recognized her earlier dismissive behavior and was subtly defending my character against her implied criticism. As more people gathered around our conversation, I began to understand that this wasn't just a chance encounter. Harrison had come to the gala specifically hoping to meet me. His security detail, his movement through the crowd, his timing. It had all been orchestrated to create this moment. I glanced at Sarah, who looked like she was watching her entire worldview collapse in real time. The community college professor she'd been ashamed to be seen with was receiving personal attention from one of the most influential people at an event where she'd been desperate to make important connections. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so fundamentally sad. What happened next transformed the entire evening into something that felt more like a movie than real life. Harrison excused himself, briefly walking toward the small stage where a microphone stood waiting for the evening's formal presentations. The ballroom's conversations gradually quieted as 300 of Los Angeles' most influential residents recognized that their host was preparing to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison's voice carried clearly through the room's sophisticated sound system, "thank you for joining us tonight in support of renewable energy education initiatives." The applause was polite but expectant. These were people accustomed to charity events and practiced in the rituals of philanthropic gatherings. "This evening we have the privilege of announcing something quite special." Harrison continued his tone-building anticipation. "For the past 6 months, the International Clean Energy Summit has been planning to feature a keynote speaker whose identity we've kept deliberately secret." I felt a strange buzzing sensation in my chest, as if my nervous system had detected something significant before my conscious mind could process it. Our keynote speaker's groundbreaking research on photovoltaic efficiency has captured the attention of researchers, policymakers, and industry leaders worldwide, Harrison announced. His work represents the kind of innovation that will define the future of sustainable energy production. Sarah grabbed my arm with sudden intensity, her fingers digging into my sleeve as if she were trying to anchor herself to reality. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison's voice rose with obvious pride. Please join me in welcoming next month's International Clean Energy Summit keynote speaker, Dr. Evan Morrison. The applause that erupted was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. 300 people, many of whom I'd never met, were giving me a standing ovation. I saw faces throughout the crowd, registering recognition and respect as they connected my name with research they'd obviously heard about through professional networks. Dr. Morrison. Harrison had used the title again, and somehow it felt appropriate now. Not because of any formal degree, but because of work that had earned recognition from peers whose opinions actually mattered. I walked toward the stage in a daze, my legs moving automatically while my mind struggled to process what was happening. 6 months ago, I'd been grading papers about basic electrical circuits in a community college classroom. Tonight I was being introduced as the keynote speaker for an international conference that would be attended by world leaders in renewable energy. Dr. Morrison's research on crystalline silicon photovoltaic optimization has already influenced policy discussions at the Department of Energy, Harrison continued as I reached the stage. 3 major corporations are currently bidding for exclusive licensing rights to his technology. 3 major corporations bidding for licensing rights. The financial implications were staggering, but more importantly, the professional validation felt overwhelming. My work wasn't just academically interesting. It had real commercial value that could influence how solar energy was produced and distributed across the country. As I accepted the microphone, I caught sight of Sarah in the crowd. Her face had progressed beyond pale to something approaching gray. She stood motionless while people around her leaned forward with obvious interest, eager to hear from someone they now understood was genuinely significant. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. 6 months ago, I was working alone in a small laboratory driven by curiosity about whether solar panels could be made more efficient through better electron transport management. The audience listened with focused attention that felt surreal after years of presenting research to half-empty academic conferences. What I've learned is that breakthrough innovations often come from unexpected places. I continued, glancing toward Sarah. Sometimes the most important work happens away from prestigious institutions in modest settings by people who are motivated purely by the desire to solve problems that matter. The applause suggested that my message resonated with an audience that included many self-made entrepreneurs who understood the value of perseverance and unglamorous dedication. As I returned to the crowd, the networking dynamic had completely transformed. Gerald Patterson pushed through the crowd with obvious desperation, his business card already extended before he reached me. Dr. Morrison, Gerald Patterson. Patterson Development Group. I'd love to discuss incorporating your solar technology into our commercial developments. The same man who had barely acknowledged my existence 2 hours earlier was now pursuing me with the intensity of a political candidate courting voters. Marcus Chen appeared at my shoulder with a knowing smile. "Welcome to the world of renewable energy celebrity," he said quietly. "It's about to get very interesting." Catherine Williams approached with her husband, a distinguished man whose face I recognized from financial magazines. "Evan, I'd like you to meet my husband, David. He manages the Williams Foundation's clean energy investment portfolio." David Williams extended his hand with obvious enthusiasm. "We've been following your research with great interest. The foundation would welcome the opportunity to discuss funding your next phase of development. Investment portfolios, research funding, licensing agreements." The phrases swirled around me like snow in a blizzard, each representing opportunities I'd never imagined possible. I looked across the crowd and saw Sarah standing alone, watching the sudden transformation with obvious shock. People who had ignored her entirely were now studying her with curious interest, clearly wondering about her relationship to someone they now recognized as genuinely important. For the first time in our relationship, I felt truly sorry for her. Not because she was being ignored, but because she was experiencing firsthand what it felt like to be valued only for association with someone else's achievements. The same dismissive treatment she'd given me for 2 years was now being reflected back at her, and she clearly didn't enjoy the sensation. The drive back to Sarah's apartment in West Hollywood passed in tense silence for the first 15 minutes. She stared out the passenger window at the city lights blurring past her reflection in the glass, showing an expression I'd never seen before. Complete bewilderment mixed with something that looked like fear. "I can't believe you never told me," she finally said, her voice barely audible above the road noise. I kept my eyes on the freeway, choosing my words carefully. "Told you what specifically?" "About the research, about how important it is, about people like Harrison knowing your name." Her voice was gaining strength, though it still carried an undertone of accusation that felt both familiar and infuriating. "Sarah, I tried to tell you about my work countless times. Every time I mentioned a breakthrough or wanted to share excitement about results, you changed the subject or told me I was getting too technical." "That's not true," she protested, though her tone lacked conviction. "I've always been supportive of your career." I felt something snap inside me, a restraint that had been holding back 2 years of accumulated frustration. "Supportive tonight. You told me not to embarrass you. You introduced me to people as just a colleague, and minimized our relationship because you were ashamed of what I do for a living." "I wasn't ashamed," Sarah said quickly, but the protest sounded hollow even to her. "I was just trying to help you network appropriately. These people operate at a different level." "What level is that exactly?" I asked, pulling off the freeway toward her neighborhood. "The level where Robert Harrison personally seeks me out. The level where I'm invited to keynote international conferences. The level where major corporations want to license my research." The questions hung in the air between us, highlighting the fundamental disconnect between Sarah's perception of social value and actual achievement. She'd spent the evening impressed by wealth and status while completely missing the substance that created both. "You should have told me about the patents," she said, shifting tactics. "About the potential income. We could have planned our future differently." Our future. The phrase felt strange, coming from someone who had just spent an entire evening denying our present. "The patents are preliminary," I said carefully. "And even if they generate significant income, that wouldn't change the fundamental nature of the work I do or who I am." "Of course it would change things," Sarah said with renewed energy. "We could buy a house in Manhattan Beach, maybe start traveling internationally. You could leave teaching and focus on research full-time." Her eagerness was both transparent and deeply unsettling. The same person who had discouraged my research for years was now planning how to spend money it might generate. The same person who had told me to think more practically was now suggesting I abandon the teaching work that kept me grounded and connected to students who needed encouragement. "What if I like teaching?" I asked. "What if I want to keep working at the community college because I believe in giving opportunities to students who can't afford prestigious universities?" Sarah's silence stretched long enough for me to park in front of her building. When she finally responded, her words revealed everything I needed to know about how she viewed our relationship. "That would be a waste," she said simply. "You could be making millions living the kind of life that actually matters, instead of teaching basic science to people who probably won't amount to anything anyway." The casual cruelty of her dismissal toward my students, hard-working adults pursuing education, despite financial constraints and family obligations, crystallized everything I'd been feeling throughout the evening. This wasn't about social insecurity or different backgrounds. This was about fundamental differences in what we valued and how we treated other people. "Sarah," I said quietly, "do you remember when we met?" "Of course," she replied, though her tone suggested she was uncertain where the conversation was heading. "You were struggling to build your business. You'd been rejected by traditional lenders and you were 3 months behind on rent. Do you remember what you told me about feeling like people looked down on you, Edie?" Her silence confirmed that she remembered. "You said the worst part wasn't the financial stress," I continued. You said the worst part was feeling invisible, like people couldn't see your potential because they only judged you by your current circumstances. I turned to face her, fully wanting her to understand the parallel I was drawing. Tonight you did exactly what those people did to you. You judge my worth based on superficial markers instead of actual substance. The difference is that I supported you when you were struggling while you've been actively discouraging me from pursuing work that might not enhance your social status. That's not fair, Sarah protested. I've never discouraged your research. The denial was so blatantly false that I almost laughed. Instead, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our text message history from the past 6 months. Here's what you wrote when I told you about getting published in the Journal of Photovoltaic Science. I read aloud. Quote, "Maybe you should focus on finding better paying work instead of chasing academic recognition that doesn't pay the bills." Sarah's face flushed, but I wasn't finished. Here's your response when I mentioned presenting at the Pacific Coast Solar Conference. Quote, "I hope you're not planning to take time off work for another one of your science hobby events." And here, I continued, is what you wrote when I told you about Dr. Foster from Harrison Industries requesting a copy of my research. Quote, "Don't get your hopes up about impressing corporate people. They're probably just being polite." Each quote felt like evidence in a trial where the verdict had already become clear. Sarah had consistently dismissed, minimized, and discouraged the very work that tonight's events proved was genuinely significant. "I was trying to protect you from disappointment," she said weakly. "No," I replied, my voice remaining calm despite the anger I felt building inside. "You were trying to protect yourself from having a boyfriend whose achievements made you feel inadequate. You wanted me to stay safely beneath your perception of your own level so you could feel superior in our relationship." The accusation hung between us like a bridge burning in both directions. Sarah's response confirmed everything I suspected about her motivations. "Maybe I did want you to be more ambitious about making money," she said, her voice becoming defensive. "Is that such a terrible thing? I wanted us to have a better life together. But tonight, when you discovered that my work actually has significant value, your first thought wasn't pride or excitement for me. Your first thought was calculating how much money it might generate and how that could benefit your lifestyle." Sarah's silence stretched long enough for both of us to recognize the truth of what I'd said. I think," I said carefully, "we both learned something important tonight about who we really are and what we actually value." She looked at me with desperate intensity, as if she could somehow undo the evening's revelations through sheer force of will. "We can fix this, Evan. Now that I understand how important your work is, things can be different." But that was exactly the problem. Sarah's newfound interest was contingent on external validation and financial potential rather than genuine appreciation for the work itself. She couldn't value something until other people told her it was valuable. I thought about Amanda Foster, the researcher Harrison had mentioned, who'd recognized the significance of my work months before tonight's revelations. I thought about my community college students who approached learning with genuine curiosity, rather than calculating what it might be worth. I thought about the possibility of relationships built on mutual respect and authentic interest, rather than social climbing and status anxiety. "Sarah," I said gently, "I don't think you can fix something you don't understand is broken." 6 months later, I stood in front of my new laboratory at the University of California, watching morning sunlight stream through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. The space was everything I'd dreamed of during those long evenings working with borrowed equipment at the community college, state-of-the-art photovoltaic testing systems, computer modeling workstations, and enough funding to pursue research without constantly worrying about material costs. The transition had been surreal but deeply satisfying. Harrison Industries had purchased exclusive licensing rights to my solar efficiency algorithms for $12.7 million, with ongoing royalty agreements that would provide substantial income for years to come. More importantly, the University of California had offered me a position as department head for their new Center for Sustainable Energy Innovation, allowing me to combine cutting-edge research with teaching graduate students who shared my passion for renewable energy. I'd established the Morrison Scholarship Fund with a portion of the licensing income, providing full tuition support for community college students pursuing degrees in renewable energy fields. The first recipients included 3 students from my former classes who had shown exceptional curiosity and dedication, despite facing significant financial obstacles. The irony wasn't lost on me that the work Sarah had consistently dismissed as impractical dreaming had created opportunities beyond anything either of us had imagined possible. But the financial success felt secondary to something more meaningful, the recognition that my research could contribute to solving problems that actually mattered for millions of people. Sarah had made numerous attempts at reconciliation during the months following the gala. Her messages and voicemails had evolved from confusion to desperation, to anger, to attempted manipulation. She'd tried claiming that she'd always believed in my potential and had been protecting me from exploitation by corporate interests. The most revealing conversation had occurred 3 weeks after the gala when she'd called to congratulate me on the licensing deal. "I always knew you were special," she'd said with forced warmth. "I hope you know I'm proud of everything you've accomplished." "Thank you," I'd replied, carefully recognizing the calculated nature of her approach. "I've been thinking," she'd continued, "now that you have financial security, maybe we could take some time to travel together. I know some amazing places in Europe where we could celebrate your success." The offer had crystallized everything problematic about our relationship. Sarah's interest in my achievements was directly proportional to their social and financial value. She couldn't appreciate the satisfaction of solving complex problems or the joy of helping students discover their potential. She could only see opportunities for lifestyle enhancement and status improvement. "Sarah," I'd said gently, "I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't think we want the same things from life." Her response had been telling, "What do you mean you can afford anything you want now?" The conversation had ended with me explaining that financial security was wonderful, but it couldn't fix fundamental incompatibilities in values and priorities. Sarah had never called again, though I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that her marketing business had failed 6 months later, when several high-profile clients discovered discrepancies between her claimed capabilities and actual performance. The contrast with my current relationship couldn't have been more striking. I'd met Amanda Foster Harrison's head of renewable energy research at the International Clean Energy Summit, where I delivered the keynote address. Amanda had attended my original community college lectures 3 years earlier, drawn by genuine interest in photovoltaic technology rather than networking opportunities. "I remember being impressed by how you explained complex concepts without condescending to students," she'd told me during our first coffee meeting. "You made advanced engineering accessible without dumbing it down." Amanda understood my work because she lived and breathed renewable energy research herself. Our conversations flowed naturally between technical discussions and broader questions about how technology could address global challenges. She'd encouraged my decision to maintain teaching responsibilities even after joining the university, understanding that education and research strengthened each other. More importantly, Amanda had supported my commitment to working with students from diverse backgrounds. She'd helped design outreach programs that brought renewable energy education to community colleges throughout California, expanding access to opportunities that had traditionally been limited to students at elite institutions. The personal growth that emerged from the gala experience extended far beyond professional success or romantic relationships. I'd learned to recognize my own value, independent of external validation, while also understanding the importance of surrounding myself with people who could see and appreciate that value authentically. The evening had taught me that genuine accomplishment often develops quietly away from social media attention and networking events. The most meaningful work frequently happens in modest settings, driven by curiosity and dedication, rather than recognition or compensation. But it had also shown me that such work could have profound impact when it addressed problems that mattered to other people. I'd learned to distinguish between relationships based on mutual respect and those built on convenience or social climbing. True partnership meant celebrating each other's achievements without feeling threatened, encouraging growth without trying to control its direction and appreciating someone's authentic self rather than their potential utility. Perhaps most importantly, I'd discovered that hiding your capabilities to make others comfortable ultimately diminishes everyone involved. Sarah's insecurity about my research hadn't protected either of us. It had prevented her from understanding who she was dating and blocked me from pursuing opportunities that could benefit both my career and the broader renewable energy field. The scholarship students I'd been mentoring reminded me constantly of why the work mattered beyond personal success. Maria Gonzalez, a single mother studying electrical engineering while working 2 part-time jobs, had told me that my encouragement helped her believe she belonged in scientific fields, despite feeling intimidated by classmates from more privileged backgrounds. "Professor Morrison," she'd said during our last meeting, "you showed me that innovation comes from dedication and curiosity, not from having the right connections or expensive equipment." Her words had captured something essential about the evening that changed everything. Authentic value develops through character contribution and treating others with genuine respect, rather than through social status or financial assets. As I prepared for my afternoon seminar on next-generation photovoltaic technology, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that uncomfortable moment when Sarah had told me not to embarrass her. The transformation hadn't happened because I'd become someone different, but because I'd finally encountered people who could recognize and appreciate who I'd always been. The lesson felt profound enough to share beyond my personal experience. People who truly love you celebrate your success rather than feel threatened by it. Authentic relationships grow when both people encourage each other's full potential instead of trying to limit it for their own comfort. Never shrink yourself to make others feel bigger. The right people will be inspired by your growth rather than intimidated by it, and their support will help you achieve things you never imagined possible. Sometimes the most important moment in your life is when someone finally sees you clearly for who you actually are, rather than who they need you to be. When that happens, everything else begins to make sense. I hope this story resonated with your own experiences and reminded you that your authentic value doesn't depend on other people's ability to recognize it. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated your capabilities or tried to diminish your achievements to make themselves feel more secure? How did you handle it, and what did you learn about yourself in the process? If this story inspired you to reflect on your own relationships and aspirations, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming challenges and discovering your true potential. Share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's insecurities or limited vision. Thank you for listening, and remember that the people who matter will always encourage you to shine as brightly as possible, rather than asking you to dim your light for their comfort. Until next time, keep believing in yourself and the unique value you bring to the world.